In today's video, we're diving into a truly intense encounter between a civilian and the police, where one man stands his ground like a total professional. This is no ordinary interaction. This is a First Amendment audit, where the stakes are high and the tension is palpable. Watch as our subject calmly refuses to give his ID, even when the officers start to push back. What makes this situation even more intriguing is the way he handles every move with complete composure, outsmarting the cops at every turn. As the officers try to control the situation, it becomes clear this man is no stranger to knowing his rights. But with mounting pressure, how will this standoff end? Will the officers back down, or will they take things to the next level? Stick around because things are about to get really interesting. You won't want to miss what happens next. As the scene unfolds, we start to understand how it all began. The man, calm and confident, was simply going about his day when the police approached him, questioning his presence in the area. Right away, you could sense the tension brewing. Instead of backing down, he politely but firmly asked the officers why they needed his ID. It was a simple question, but it set the tone for what would become a heated exchange. The officers, clearly not used to being questioned, tried to assert their authority, but this guy wasn't rattled. He knew the law and wasn't afraid to stand his ground. You could tell this wasn't his first time dealing with this kind of situation. Meanwhile, the onlookers began to gather, curious about how this would play out. With every word exchanged, the stakes seemed to rise. What's going to happen next? Stay tuned. As the officers pressed for answers, their tone shifted, becoming more assertive. They claimed they were just doing their job, but the man wasn't buying it. He calmly reminded them that in this country, simply standing somewhere or recording in public isn't a crime. The crowd that had gathered began to whisper among themselves. Some supported the man's courage, while others questioned whether he was pushing his luck. The officers, growing visibly frustrated, started throwing out vague phrases like suspicious activity and failure to comply, but they couldn't give a clear reason for their demands. The man stood firm, repeating a simple yet powerful question. "Am I being detained?" It was a phrase that hung heavy in the air, leaving the officers momentarily speechless. The tension crackled as they tried to regain control, shifting their approach. Would they escalate the situation or finally back off? The answer was still up in the air. The officers exchanged glances, their frustration evident as they tried to figure out their next move. The man's calm demeanor seemed to throw them off, and it was clear they hadn't expected someone so composed. One of them stepped forward, leaning in slightly, and repeated the demand for ID, this time with more force in his voice. The man didn't flinch. "Unless you can tell me what law I've broken, I'm not required to show you anything," he replied evenly. His words carried a weight that silenced the murmurs in the crowd. The tension hit a boiling point when one officer began reaching for something on his belt, possibly his notepad, while the other gestured toward the man as if to block his path. It felt like the next move could go either way. Would they try to intimidate him further, or would they realize they were at a dead end? The crowd held its breath, waiting for what would come next. Just when it seemed like the officers were running out of options, a new figure appeared. Another officer, this one in plain clothes, walking up from a parked car nearby. The crowd shifted, whispers rippling through as people speculated whether this new arrival would escalate the situation or de-escalate it. The man stood his ground, unfazed, though his eyes briefly flickered to the newcomer. The plainclothes officer didn't waste time, speaking directly to the man in a calmer tone, but with an edge of authority. "We're just trying to make sure everything's okay here," he said. "If you cooperate, this can be over quickly." But the man didn't take the bait. "If you're just checking, then I'm free to go, right?" he replied. The officer's expression tightened, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then he turned to his colleagues and began a hushed conversation. Whatever they were discussing, it clearly wasn't going the way they had hoped. The tension was now thicker than ever, and the stakes had just been raised. Would this new officer find a way to corner the man, or was something bigger at play? The plainclothes officer finally turned back to the man, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation. "Look, we're not trying to make this a big deal," he said. "We just need to confirm who you are." But the man wasn't budging. "Unless you have a lawful reason to detain me, I'm done here," he said firmly, taking a step back. The crowd murmured in approval, sensing the tide turning. Then came the twist. A bystander who had been quietly filming the entire exchange stepped forward and addressed the officers. "You're being recorded, and everything he said is correct," they said. The officers froze, clearly aware of the implications. The plainclothes officer glanced at the cameras now pointed at them from multiple angles and seemed to weigh his options. After a tense pause, he signaled for the others to back off. Without another word, the man walked away, leaving the officers standing there, their authority quietly dismantled. Just as the crowd began to disperse, the bystander called out, "That's how you stand up for your rights." It was a moment that left everyone thinking about the power of knowing the law and the courage it takes to stand by it. As the man walked away, the crowd slowly began to disperse, leaving the officers to regroup and reflect on what had just happened. The atmosphere, once tense and charged, had shifted to something more contemplative. Some people stayed behind, talking quietly about what they had witnessed. For many, it was a reminder of the importance of knowing their rights and staying calm under pressure. The man, now far from the scene, disappeared into the distance without looking back, his quiet victory speaking volumes. The bystander who had stepped forward shared their recording online, where it quickly gained traction, sparking conversations about accountability and the power of standing firm. This wasn't just a story about one man refusing to show his ID. It was about courage, knowledge, and the power of composure in the face of authority. In the end, it left a lasting message. Knowing your rights isn't just important, it's empowering.